I had been walking since late afternoon, following a trail that seemed familiar from the map, but the forest didn't agree with maps. The sun was slipping behind the distant ridges, and the shadows grew long and cold, stretching across the mossy ground like dark fingers. Each step sank slightly into the damp carpet of pine needles, and the air smelled of earth and decay. The deeper I went, the quieter it became, too quiet. No birds, no rustling of small animals, only the sound of my own boots pressing into the soil and the occasional creak of a branch overhead. At first, I told myself it was nothing, just the forest being empty and still. But then I noticed the shadows. They didn't move the way shadows normally do. They flickered, stretched, twisted as if alive. One moment a tree looked normal, the next it seemed taller, its bark twisted into something almost like a face, watching me with hollow eyes. My flashlight flickered once, twice, and I realized I hadn't checked its batteries in days. I tapped it against my palm, heart pounding, trying to ignore the feeling crawling along my spine. A soft sound reached me then, a scratching, almost like claws across wood. It wasn't close, but it moved with a strange intelligence, circling, pausing, listening. I held my breath, listening too. I whispered my own name, and for a second I thought I heard it whispered back, but lower, distorted, echoing from somewhere I couldn't see. My rational mind screamed, "Wind, animal, imagination." But the air didn't feel like wind, and no animal I knew would move this silently. The trail began to twist unnaturally. Roots and branches, which had previously been easy to navigate, now rose and stretched into the path like deliberate traps. I stumbled over one, catching myself on another, and felt a wet, sticky substance smear across my fingers. I looked down. Nothing, just the leaves and mud. Still, the smell was different now. Earth, yes, but with a sharp metallic tang, as if something rotten and alive had been crushed into the soil. Then came the whispering. It was soft, almost intimate, like someone talking just behind my ear, yet when I turned there was nothing. The sound moved with me, always slightly ahead, sometimes behind, sometimes directly above in the dark canopy. My flashlight's beam swung wildly, catching glimpses of impossible angles. The corner of a tree that shouldn't be there, a patch of darkness deeper than night itself, a space where the forest seemed hollow. I ran then, not knowing where I was going, only that I had to get out. Branches snagged my clothes, roots grabbed my boots, and the whispering followed, faster, urgent now. I tripped over a large root, fell forward, scraping my hands and knees, and in that instant I saw them. Two faintly glowing eyes in the distance, half hidden behind a tree, watching me. They didn't reflect the light, they emitted it, soft and cold. I blinked and they were gone, but the sense of being watched intensified, pressing down on me, a weight I could not escape. The forest seemed to shift around me. Trails I had followed now led nowhere, turning back on themselves. One tree would vanish from sight, replaced by another twisted and unfamiliar. The whispers became words, though I could not understand them, hissing in a cadence that matched my heartbeat. Something was moving in the shadows, fluid and tall, limbs bending in ways that made my stomach twist. The wind carried it closer, though I could not see it, and the sound of the scratching returned, faster, sharper, deliberate. I paused, gasping, pressed against a thick trunk, trying to calm my racing heart. The air was suddenly colder, heavier, and the smell stronger, the metallic decay so sharp it made my eyes water. I realized I had not been walking in a straight line, but in circles, deeper into a part of the forest that should not exist. Thus, I had glimpsed them before, but now I felt their presence everywhere. Behind every shadow, every tree, every hollowed-out stump, something was watching, something waiting. A low growl rose from the underbrush somewhere behind me, but the sound was wrong, too resonant, too deep, vibrating through the ground. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting across thick trunks, branches, and empty spaces. The whispering grew into a chorus, overlapping voices, laughing, sighing, whispering, calling my name over and over. I stumbled backward into a hollow, a small clearing I hadn't noticed before. The ground here was bare, blackened, like ash, and the air felt heavy, almost liquid. Something moved then just at the edge of the light. It was taller than any human, impossibly thin, its shape barely holding together, limbs bending and stretching in ways that seemed wrong. I froze. It didn't make a sound, but the presence of it filled the clearing, pressing in from all sides. And then, for a moment, I thought it smiled. Not a human smile, but something more. A mockery, a hunger, a promise of what it would do if I stayed. I wanted to run. My legs felt like lead. My hands shook so hard I could barely hold the flashlight. The whispers grew louder, closer, insistent. The ground seemed to pulse beneath me. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't lost. I had been led here. I realized I wasn't lost. I had been led here. Every twisted trail, every unnatural shadow, every whispering voice had been guiding me deeper, and now the forest had me completely. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst, and my lungs burned from running in circles, yet my legs refused to move faster than a staggered, cautious step. The clearing stretched before me, blackened earth underfoot, bare except for a few gnarled stumps. The air felt thick, almost viscous, pressing down on my shoulders and chest, making it hard to breathe. The tall, thin shape lingered at the edge of my flashlight's beam. It didn't move like any animal, nor like a human. Its limbs bent impossibly, shoulders twisting where they shouldn't, elbows pointing outward. Its head tilted unnaturally, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of a face, wrongly proportioned, pale and wet-looking, eyes like holes glowing faintly in the dim light. My rational mind screamed that it couldn't be real, yet everything my body felt told me otherwise. I tried to back away slowly, keeping my flashlight fixed on the creature. As I moved, the ground seemed to shift beneath my boots. Roots that had seemed solid now felt slick, almost like they were gripping at my feet. The whispering returned, louder, closer, a chorus of voices overlapping, calling my name, urging me forward, pulling me toward the center of the clearing. The metallic, rotten smell from before grew stronger, mixing with the sharp tang of wet leaves and mud. My stomach turned. Then I tripped hard. My flashlight went spinning, casting long, jagged shadows across the clearing. The creature moved with terrifying speed, sliding between the shadows like it wasn't limited by the ground at all. I scrambled to pick up the flashlight, praying it hadn't gone out, and when I turned it back on, the eyes were closer. Too close. They were fixed on me, unmoving, yet somehow everywhere at once. Panic hit me fully then. I screamed, the sound hoarse and raw, and ran. The clearing ended abruptly, and I slammed into a wall of trees. Branches tore at my jacket, roots snagged my boots, and the flashlight wobbled in my hand, beam flickering. Behind me, I heard the scraping again, fast, deliberate, like claws sliding across bark. I didn't dare look back. Hours, or maybe minutes, I couldn't tell, passed in a blur of running and stumbling. Every trail seemed unfamiliar, even though I knew the forest. Landmarks shifted or vanished as soon as I looked at them directly. My flashlight dimmed to a faint glow, and I began to realize that my sense of direction was gone entirely. Hunger, thirst, and exhaustion started gnawing at me, but there was no time to stop. Something was moving with me, always just beyond the light, waiting. I collapsed at last near a fallen log, gasping, fingers scraping mud as I tried to steady myself. The whispers had stopped, or maybe I was too exhausted to hear them, but the presence remained. The forest felt alive, watching, waiting. And then, faintly, I saw it again. Two glowing points, low to the ground this time, moving slowly around the log. Its shape was almost indistinct, but I could tell it was studying me like a predator curious about prey. I forced myself to calm down. My mind screamed at me to run again, but my body wouldn't respond. I listened. The forest seemed to exhale around me, wind in the pines sounding almost like a sigh. Then I remembered something, the stories my grandfather had told me about the old logging roads and the hollow pines near here. People avoided them for a reason. They said the forest didn't like being alone. That something lived between the trees, something that fed on fear, and sometimes it wasn't fast or strong. It just waited, patient, letting people make their mistakes. I realized then what I had been doing wrong. I had panicked. I had let the forest see my fear, let it lead me deeper. If I wanted to survive, I needed to move quietly, steadily, without drawing attention. I swallowed my fear as best I could, took a deep breath, and began walking again, slowly, deliberately. Each step was measured. I avoided snapping branches, pressing down on the undergrowth carefully. The glowing eyes flickered at the edges of my vision, watching, but I refused to acknowledge them. Hours passed. I lost track of time, but finally the canopy thinned and I saw faint light ahead. The smell of decaying earth faded, replaced by crisp night air. The whispering had stopped completely. I stumbled onto a narrow dirt road I recognized, the one leading back to my car. My legs trembled, muscles screaming, but I kept moving. The forest behind me was silent now, as if nothing had been there at all. I never saw the creature up close. I never tried to look back. But I knew what I had encountered wasn't a bear or a human or any animal I had studied. It was something else, patient and clever, waiting for anyone foolish enough to let fear guide their steps. I left the forest that night, every sense on edge. The image of those glowing eyes burned into my mind forever. I drove home slowly, checking every shadow along the roadside. The streetlights and distant houses felt unreal, almost too normal after the hollow between pines. And though I was safe, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. If I returned, if I let myself panic again, it would be waiting, patient, watching. I had arrived at the edge of the forest just as the sun was bleeding into the horizon, painting the sky a bruised purple and orange. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their trunks black and thick, roots curling over the ground like frozen serpents. I shouldn't have come alone, but something about the place drew me, an almost magnetic pull, subtle, quiet, and unnerving. Locals had warned me about the hollow woods, but I shrugged off their stories as the exaggerations of small-town fear. Now, standing at the threshold, I felt their words echoing in my chest. The first steps were easy, even pleasant. The air smelled of wet pine and decaying leaves, rich and earthy, carrying the faint chill of approaching night. Birds called distantly, and a small creek gurgled somewhere nearby. But as I ventured further, the sounds began to change. The birds fell silent, the creek's murmur seemed hollow, echoing unnaturally. A low hum drifted through the air, not mechanical, not human, not animal, just a tone that vibrated in my bones and made my teeth chatter. Branches scraped against my jacket as I pushed through dense undergrowth. My flashlight flickered once, then steadied, revealing shapes in the trees that shouldn't have been there. Knots in the bark twisted into grotesque faces for a heartbeat before dissolving back into normalcy. I shook my head, telling myself it was a trick of exhaustion and shadows. Yet the feeling persisted. I wasn't alone. Then came the whispers. Barely audible at first, curling around me like smoke, impossible to locate. I stopped, trying to hear clearly, but they shifted, moving from left to right, behind and above, surrounding me. They were not words, not sentences, just murmurs, almost unintelligible, yet intimately familiar, like echoes of memories that weren't mine. My pulse quickened, but I forced myself to breathe slowly, counting each exhale, trying to anchor myself. Something shifted in the corner of my vision. I froze. There, between two enormous oaks, a figure moved, but it was wrong. Its motion was fluid, too smooth, like water, bending around branches without making a sound. I blinked. The shape was tall, impossibly thin, and for an instant I thought I saw its limbs stretched beyond natural angles. Its head tilted sharply, unnaturally, and a faint glow radiated from what I assumed were its eyes, cold, unblinking, but somehow alive. I stumbled backward, nearly falling over a root. The whispers intensified, faster now, more urgent. They weren't just surrounding me, They were inside me, pressing on my thoughts, twisting my perception. My flashlight flickered again, and I caught glimpses of movement everywhere. In the underbrush, in the hollows of fallen logs, between the trunks of ancient pines. It was as if the forest itself had become aware of me. I tried to run, but the forest refused. Trails I had thought familiar twisted into loops, bending in ways that defied reason. A fallen tree that should have been easy to climb over became a wall. Roots seemed to rise from the ground to trip me. The undergrowth snagged at my boots, tearing my jacket, scratching my hands. And all the while, the whispers pressed closer, and the figure followed silently, never fully visible, never letting me sense its full form. I reached a small clearing at last, barely bigger than a few steps across, and sank to my knees, shaking. The ground here was different, bare, dark, and slick with something damp that I couldn't identify. My flashlight trembled in my hand. The figure had paused at the edge just outside the light and watched. Its glow pulsed faintly as though breathing. I realized something then. It didn't need to chase me. It only needed me to stay afraid. Fear made me move, stumble, expose myself, and it waited, patient and deliberate. Hours might have passed, or maybe minutes, I no longer knew. The whispers slowed, dropping into a steady rhythm, almost a heartbeat. My own heart matched it. My muscles ached, my lungs burned, but I couldn't stop paying attention. Every small sound, the crack of a branch, a rustle in the leaves, the distant groan of the forest, was amplified, magnified, a warning. I had no idea how long I could survive like this. Then I noticed something new. The shadows were shifting differently now, forming patterns, shapes that weren't quite random. Lines of movement in the brush, faint silhouettes weaving in and out of the darkness, suggesting more than one presence. I swallowed hard, chest tight. The forest was alive, not in the usual sense, but with something conscious, intelligent, predatory. Something that knew the forest intimately, knew me, and had been waiting for my arrival. I forced myself to stand, shaking, and began to move slowly, deliberately, toward a distant hill where the light from the dying sun hinted at an exit. My steps were careful, almost ritualistic, and I avoided snapping branches. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel the gaze on me everywhere at once, following, anticipating, calculating. My mind screamed for logic, for escape, but the instinctive fear that had taken root in my spine kept me alert, alive, fragile as a bird in the night. By the time the darkness fully swallowed the forest, I had made little progress. The glow from the figure, or figures, still lingered at the edges of my perception. The whispers had become a chorus again, layered, overlapping, almost melodic but filled with menace. I could not sleep. I could not rest. Every muscle ached, my stomach burned with hunger, yet my senses were sharper than ever. I realized then that the forest had changed me, altered the rules of reality around me, and whatever waited inside would not relent. The night had deepened, folding the forest into an endless blackness that seemed to hum. My flashlight was weak now, its beam trembling with each breath I took, revealing only patches of the path ahead. The whispers had grown quieter, yet I could feel them in my mind, threads of sound weaving thoughts I hadn't thought before, nudging my fear, sharpening my awareness. I forced myself to ignore them, stepping carefully, listening to the soil, the roots, the leaves, feeling for the forest traps. The figure, or figures, remained at the edges of my perception. Not fully visible, never approaching directly, yet present, constant, patient. I realized then that it wasn't hunting in the way an animal hunts. It didn't need speed. It didn't need claws or teeth. It only needed to let me survive just enough to keep moving into the trap I couldn't yet see. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. My legs burned with fatigue, my lungs screamed for air, my stomach twisted painfully, yet the forest allowed no pause. Every misstep, Every snapped branch, every faltering heartbeat was amplified, noted. I stumbled into a narrow ravine, forced my way through thickets, and finally came upon a faint ridge where the moonlight touched the treetops. Relief surged, but it was shallow, because the shadows beneath the trees shifted with unnatural intent. Then I saw it, or them, clearly at last. One shape, tall, thin, limbs bending unnaturally, its head tilted like it was examining me from an angle no human could. Its glow had dimmed, subtle now, but unmistakable. And then, behind it, more shapes emerged, silent, observing. They didn't move quickly. They simply flowed through the shadows like liquid darkness, wrapping around the clearing, surrounding me without sound. Panic flared. My brain screamed for escape. I ran blindly, crashing through low branches, slipping over roots. One of the creatures followed more closely now. I could feel its presence brushing against the edges of perception, like a pressure in the air, a coldness in my chest. I stumbled, fell, and felt a claw of fear dig into my mind. I didn't scream. I couldn't. Somehow, I made it out of the ravine and onto a path I recognized, the one that led to the old logging road. My legs were shaking, my chest heaving. The forest behind me was silent, almost eerily so, as if the creatures had receded just far enough to watch me flee. My flashlight died. I dropped it, trembling, and pressed on, guided only by moonlight. I didn't look back. I didn't slow until the trees thinned completely, revealing the familiar curve of the road ahead. The air smelled normal again, pine and earth without the metallic tang of decay. I didn't stop until I reached my car. My hands shook as I unlocked it, my fingers raw from grabbing branches and roots. I threw myself inside, locked the doors, and sat there, panting, staring into the forest that had nearly consumed me. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every shadow in my bedroom reminded me of the shapes I'd seen, the glowing eyes that had watched me stumble through the hollow woods. I knew something had followed me, perhaps lingering at the edges of the forest, waiting. The forest had shown me that it was patient. It didn't need to act quickly. It only needed to ensure that I carried its memory, fear embedded deep in my mind, a warning to myself and anyone foolish enough to follow the paths I had taken. Weeks passed, but the memory didn't fade. Sometimes, when I'm walking alone or standing near trees, I feel a presence in the corner of my vision. Not a shadow, not a reflection, but something watching just beyond perception. And I know with that quiet certainty that chills me to my core that the hollow woods are patient. And someday if I, or someone else, returns, they will be ready.